Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Safe Sport Allies International webinar, See Something, Do Something, Responding to Harassment and Abuse in Sport. It's my big honor and joy to introduce first the housekeeping rules for this webinar. The webinar will be recorded and it will be available on Child Hub YouTube channel. Please address all your questions in the Q&A box. Thus, we'll be able to answer to them because it will be recorded. And for any technical issues, please write in the chat and our support team from Child Hub will answer. Child Hub is the platform that supports us. Thank you. And it's my big honor to introduce you to Tin Vertomen, the coordinator of Safe Sport Allies. Christina.
Thank you, Christina, and good day, good lunchtime for you, or maybe for other people joining from other parts of the world, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to our webinar, and thank you, Christina and Child Hub, for providing the platform for us to share a little bit of the news that we have from Safe Sport Allies, our favorite European project we're currently all involved in. Let's go over the schedule for today. We have 1.5 hours to 2 hours today. Please don't be shy. You can eat your lunch or have a drink or whatever you want. We know it's lunchtime of day, so we won't distract you from having lunch. Please feel free to do so. We will wait with our lunch till after this webinar because there's a lot of interesting talks coming up. I will start with giving you an introduction and some background on the Safe Sport Allies project. Then we'll listen to Christina and Suus, who will tell you a little bit more of the survivor perspective on preventing harassment and abuse in local sport clubs, because that is a core element in our project, to start from the voices, the learnings, and the understanding of survivors of harassment and abuse to create strong prevention materials. Then it's time to show you the materials we developed and tested in our project. Anne de Kok from the Center for Ethics in Sport will share those materials with you. And then we will give you an insight in the first scientific results of the implementation of Safe Sport Allies. We tested the materials in a couple of sport clubs in Belgium and in the Netherlands, and we will give you some insights in whether or not these tools really help you to change behaviors and to prevent harassment and abuse in local sport clubs. Last but not least, it's over to Huib from the Mulier Institute, who will give you some tips on how to sustainably implement such prevention and educational tools in the environment of a voluntary sports club in your own country. We'll close by giving you some insights in what else is coming up with Safe Sport Allies. Okay, let's get started with, let's say, a couple of questions for you. We know there's many of you present. I hope you already had the time to join. I don't know if everybody's still there, but let's start with going to menti.com. So please use your browser or your phone if you like. Go to menti.com and use the code that you see here on the top of the screen. So that's 72857489. Simple question to you to start with. In which country are you currently based? The countries that is mentioned the most will get bigger. As you can see, a lot of our Belgian friends are present here today. That's not a surprise, but good to see there's other countries as well. Okay, I see people from Switzerland, Hungary, the Netherlands, welcome. Romania, Spain, nice. Germany, okay, welcome everybody. That's a lot of people already coming in. If you have time, please go to menti.com. Oh, some participants from Italy and Turkey, USA, welcome and good morning. Luxembourg, bonjour. Lots of countries present here, and that's the joy of a European collaborative project. In our project, there are 6 countries represented, and I see they're all represented here. And I also see a couple of other countries coming in, even as a person who is based in country, the country of countries. Okay, thank you very much. We have one more question about you, just to get an idea of who's currently in this webinar. What's your favorite sport? Is that the sport you're working in at the moment, or is it the sport you love to practice yourself, or the sport that you love watching on TV, whatever? Just what comes in mind for you directly. Swimming, basketball, tennis, mountain bike, cycling. Okay, all the sports I'm familiar with. We did learn some new sports in the Safe Sport Allies project that I wasn't familiar with. Caving, okay. Suus does a sport that I wasn't familiar with before we started this project. Maybe she can go into a little bit of a background on that later. Yoga, nice. Lopen, so that means running in Dutch, or athletics. Rollerblading, cool. Wow, that's a big variety of sports. And one thing is for sure, I think everybody that's present here in this webinar loves sport. We love to do sport ourselves. Maybe we also love to watch sports. We think sport can have a very positive role in society to create, of course, better health, social health, mental health, physical health, all create inclusion in society, it can increase gender equality. So we all love sport, but at the same time, I think everybody here knows that there's also some risks involved in sport participation. Risk on physical or mental injuries, but also risk to be exposed to harassment and abuse. Like in every other sector in society, in sport, we might be exposed to forms of harassment and abuse. And that is the reason, of course, why we are focusing on the prevention of sexual harassment and abuse and other forms of physical or mental violence in sport. Let's listen or read a couple of quotes of survivors that we encountered during our project. This is a quote of the first one. 2 of my teammates grabbed me in the shower. They said it was just for fun. Another one. Everybody in the gym saw it, but nobody did something. I was so confused. And the last one. They were the most popular person in the club. I had no proof. No one would ever believe me. These are just 3 of the quotes of long narratives and stories of survivors that we spoke with in this project. And what became very clear to us is that in several of these occasions of sometimes child chronic abuse, is that there's often people present or aware of things that are not going well, of things that are going on that feel unhealthy, that don't feel safe, something that is off. So people involved in the situations were informed and did not know what to do, did not know when to take action, or didn't feel responsible to do something. And here, this is a quote from, of course, a World War survivor here that says, it was not the cruelty of the oppressor that hurted me the most, but the silence of the bystander. And indeed, that is something that we heard a lot in listening to these stories, and that we think we can improve and we should improve also in the context of local sport organizations. That's why we started this project, and we decided to focus on the role of the active bystander to prevent harassment and abuse in sport. What is a bystander? It's a person that is in the neighborhood of an incident, so who is not the perpetrator or the victim, but has the role and the possibility to intervene in a situation, to stop or to change the situations ongoing in the rest of the situation there. We focus in this project on reactive bystanding. That's different from active bystanding. What is reactive bystanding? There's a couple of forms. For example, if you see there's a situation of harassment or abuse ongoing, what you could do is indeed assist the perpetrator, even reinforce the perpetrator or encourage the perpetrator. And that of course, are forms of negative reactive bystanding. You increase possibly the harm of the situation, you make the situation also continue longer time. This is not a positive side of bystanding. Another type of negative bystanding is passive bystanding. That is even more often the case in cases of harassment and abuse in sport. You see something is off, but you look away. You see there's something, but you do not intervene because you don't know how, because you don't want to, because you don't know where to get help, because you don't see it as a problem. There might be many reasons. That's what we called positive bystanding. Of course, we want to avoid negative and passive bystanding because this harms the victim, it harms the situation, and it gives the perpetrator the feeling that it's okay what is going on. And that is totally the opposite of what we want in a safe sport environment. What we want to stimulate, of course, is positive pro-social bystanding. What can you do in a situation of harassment and abuse? Of course, it really depends on the situation itself, but a couple of things you can do is, of course, trying to stop the behavior immediately. In milder case of harassment and abuse with children, you can also just distract the perpetrator and thereby solve the situation very easily. If you cannot do something yourself, you can quickly ask for help from an adult that is in your environment, or you can, if you have the authority, reprimand the perpetrator and make sure, of course, you comfort the victim. There's also much more you can do during and also after the incident. For example, make sure the perpetrator is being followed up on, make sure you follow up with the persons that were involved, asking them whether they are okay, whether there's something else you can do. So positive bystanding can take place during, but also after an incident. And lastly, to complete this model, we also look at proactive bystanding. This is, for example, all of us present here, educating ourselves on what bystanding is, not related to a certain incident, but just having a proactive attitude to make sure that we know what harassment and abuse is, what the risk factors are, where to refer to in case of a concern or an incident. That is exactly the focus of this project. And let me now try to explain you what the psychological theories behind bystanding behavior. Because maybe to some of you, it might feel like an automatic reaction. You see something, you do something. Unfortunately, there's a lot of maybe subconscious steps that you go through before you can take the action that is the appropriate action in a situation. Let's start from the beginning. Sometimes there are signs of harassment and abuse. Sometimes they're not that clear. Sometimes they're very obvious. So it really depends on the situation. Now, what happens then in the mind of the perpetrator? The bystander. First of all, the person should be able to notice the signs of harassment and abuse. If you don't see them, you can, of course, not start the cycle of positive bystanding. So you should be vigilant for signs of harassment and abuse, and therefore you should be educated to know what such signs and symptoms could be. That's the first step. Can already go wrong there. But if you are able to see the signs of harassment and abuse, step 2 is then to interpret these signs as a problem. If you see signs of unhealthy behavior between people, but you don't consider it as unhealthy or a problem, you will, of course, not go to step 3 or step 4 or intervene in a situation. So you need to assess the signs, interpret them, and see them as a problem. The next step then is to see it as your problem. Sometimes we see and hear in sports organizations that indeed people are aware of the situation, but they consider it as not their business. It's the parents that should do the upbringing of these children. It's the coach that should intervene if the children don't behave well, or whatever reason you might have. If you do not consider it your responsibility to intervene, you will not take appropriate action. So that's step 3. Then in step 4, you should be able to assess the situation. If you think it's a problem, if you think it's your problem and your responsibility to act, you then need to analyze what exactly is the situation here. Is it bad? Is it just mildly? What can I do myself? How severe is the situation? What are my options? Depending on the severity of the situation, what are my options? Can I intervene myself? Can I refer to somebody else? Who then should I refer to? And only then, after that thinking process, you will be able to select the appropriate reaction and then act as a positive bystander. Best case, that is what you do. And then the circles around these bystanders say that, of course, you're not alone in this. You are influenced by the structure, by the organization, and by the culture that you are working in. If you are trying to do the good thing, but there is no safeguarding officer in your club or federation, there is no code of conduct, there is no board that supports the well-being and the health and the welfare of your athletes, it's of course much more complicated for you to be a positive bystander. So the networks around you should also be prepared and ready to help you deal with the concern of harassment and abuse. That is exactly what we try to influence in the project of Safe Sport Allies. Let me introduce you to the team. This is the Safe Sport Allies team on a Bilbao city trip where we had one of our first meetings with these organizations. We are very proud to have the safeguarding officer of the Bilbao Foundation, the Athletics Club Bilbao Foundation, Iñaki in our group. Then already you met Christina from Terre Zon, who represents the Child Protection Agency. We also have the Cyprus Sport Organization, bringing in all the expertise from sports policy and sport development. Then us is a team of Caroline, Helena and me from Thomas More, the Research Institute in Belgium. We also have a coach education expert, Kirsi from Finland, Haga Helia, University of Applied Sciences. We have a methodological expert from the Open University in the Netherlands, Gjalt Joran, in our group. And then HAP is representing the Melier Institute, a research institute in the Netherlands. And then there's the Stilte Verbroken, which is a survivor foundation, Broken Silence in English, represented by Suus today and Renald Major, who play a crucial role in this project to make sure we build in the survivor voice and learnings and understanding into our project. And last, there's the Center for Ethics in Sport, who is the Belgian expert in helping sport organizations to implement safeguarding policies. Altogether, 6 countries from Europe who are building since 2 years a very strong consortium to work on this issue. Now, a little bit more about the project aim. Of course, we all want to prevent and tackle harassment and abuse in local sport clubs. We want to make sure to focus first on the most vulnerable sport participants who are the minor, so children in local sport clubs. So we know there's thousands and thousands of children playing sports on a daily basis, and we think we need to do more to protect them and make sure we prevent harassment and abuse. We want to do so by developing an intervention program specifically focusing on bystanders. Why bystanders? Because we believe everybody can be a bystander today or tomorrow. Maybe you will become a perpetrator or a victim, we don't know, but we do know you can be a bystander sooner or later because of the high incidence of harassment and abuse in sport. We want you to focus on that role and take your responsibility whenever you see or hear something. How do we do that? We want to help you by educating all athletes, coaches, parents, and club administrators to do the right thing, to feel more confident in spotting signs and taking the right actions in case needed. Of course, we also want to test it in a scientific way. Why? We know there's a lot of safeguarding initiatives from educational programs to codes of conduct being developed at the moment, but we actually don't know very well whether they work. And if they work, what exactly is the elements in such a program that do change behavior? That's why we set up a scientific design to measure the effectiveness of this educational program. And of course, if we find out that the program is effective, we want to try and think of a good multiplying strategy to spread all of the materials into as many sport organizations as possible. That's the goal of our project. Now, a little word on the program development. We didn't start right away with the materials. We have, of course, a very good pre-study before we started development. First of all, there's 2 very important sources of information. We looked at the literature on bystander interventions available in sport, but also outside sport. What is already done? What works? What things should we keep in mind when we develop a bystander program? And secondly, we listened to the survivor and bystander voice. What did they experience? What could have helped them? And what should we take into account when developing such program? You'll hear more about that very soon with Christina and Suus. Then we started to build the intervention, and we really quickly realized that we should make specific materials for 4 main target groups in the local sport club: the young sport participants themselves, the coaches, their parents, and club administrators. We developed the materials, and of course, before implementing them in the sports world, we tested them with pilot studies, and of course, adaptations where needed were performed. Then we needed some help to give all these workshops and all of the different learning methodologies that we used. And therefore, we trained some trainers in Belgium and the Netherlands to make sure we have enough man-force to bring this all to the sports field. Last stage, still ongoing, is the implementation, of course, the monitoring of what's going on and the evaluation of the materials we developed. First, listening to the literature. Always start with reading as much as you can about the topic. That is what we did. And our colleague from the Lear Institute, Huib's colleague Vidar, was able to analyze a lot of scientific literature on the effectiveness of bystander interventions in and outside sport. He summarized the literature for us with 5 key points. First of all, bystander or prevention programs in general seem to be more effective if there is a multi-dose methodology behind it. So instead of just giving one workshop and that's it, they recommend, the literature recommends to repeat with, for example, smaller doses of the same content and repeat it over and over again. You can compare it with your the COVID vaccinations and the booster vaccination injections that we followed afterwards. Indeed, longer sessions and more repetition in this content is better to really influence people's knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors towards positive bystanding. always combine the education with communication campaigns so that the message is always being distributed and spread continuously in your organization. Secondly, there are a couple of cultures, unhealthy cultures, that influence people's attitudes and norms towards positive bystanding. Patriarchy, masochism, and rape cultures, rape-supporting cultures, of course, are very extreme examples of cultures in which it's more difficult to intervene. To change these cultures, it's not that easy. You first need to deconstruct the social norms and then reconstruct new healthy social norms. So we should take into account that an educational program alone will not change that, and you really need to work on changing the culture in your organization. Third point to keep in mind is the different roles. There are a lot of different roles in the situation of harassment and abuse. There's a person experiencing the behavior, there's the person or persons perpetrating the behavior. Sometimes there are reinforcers, there's outsiders, there's defenders, there's people responsible for the sport organizations, there's the parents who are responsible for their children, many people involved. And often in small organizations, those people have different roles at the same time. For example, the coach is also the board administrator, or the parent also takes a role in the administration of the club. So we need to be very careful, certainly for children, that there is no role confusion here. Fourth point of attention is how to increase bystander response. Well, mainly by making sure they are supported in what they do and they have the necessary skills and information to intervene. So we really need to educate them so they feel more confident to step in whenever it's needed. Lastly, and that's a very nice, I think, finding from the literature, is that, of course, you can put in place all the official help you can get. You can ask help from the police, the justice system, victim counseling systems, but even as equally important is also to pay attention to informal help you can offer, just as human beings in a small culture of the sports club. Provide emotional support, provide informational support, provide instrumental support, help somebody to know where to find help. Just ask a person, how are you doing and how are you feeling now? Are you feeling better? These kind of very simple things can have a major impact on how the survivor is experiencing the situation afterwards and becoming more resilient after an incident of harassment and abuse. When we set up informal networks of such help, we really create learning points and a stronger community of care, not only among sports safeguarding specialists, but also with all stakeholders in your club. That were the main insights I wanted to share with you from the literature. And now it's time to listen to the insights from survivors. And therefore, I'd like to give the floor to Christina and Suze.
So hi, I'm very honored and glad to introduce you first to Suze. Suzanne is a freelancer writer and a project manager and works for Breaking the Silence, a Dutch foundation that gives a voice to survivors of abuse in sport and advocates for a safe sport environment. As Tina said, Breaking the Silence is one of the partners of Safe Sport Allies. And Suzanne decided to join the foundation after coming to terms with her own experience of abuse in sport as a child and wants to give insights from her case to help create a safe sport environment. So thank you so much, Suze, that you are willing to share today with us and answer a few questions for me.
Glad to be here.
Hi, Suze.
Hi.
And my first question is, how did the experience affect you?
Yeah, well, my sport was a kind of an unusual one. I did circus as a child for a long time. And I was sexually assaulted by my trainer at that time, but it took a long time for me to realize how much and in what way it had affected me. But in the end, I had a difficult time connecting to people. I was averse to physical touch and had panic attacks and learned not to trust people. So it had a really big impact on my life afterwards. I also thought it was my own fault, which also made sure it took a long time for me to come to terms with it. But the strange thing is that I also saw it happen to other people in my group, in my team, and I knew it was not quite right. but everyone around me acted like it was normal, or that kind of familiarity was part of the way things were and supposed to be. So it's hard to believe your own feelings or believe what you've experienced as something bad if everyone around you doesn't see it that way. So yeah, that messes with your head.
Yeah. What made it difficult for you to go forward? What made it?
There were a few factors. Some had to do with who I was and what I had learned in my life. I felt a lot of confusion about what happened. I was really young. I had almost no experience with intimacy, so I just didn't know what was normal. And if you don't know what's normal, then it's hard to say that something bad happened. I didn't know if I had communicated something that I was not aware of. I didn't know about the power imbalance between the trainer and their athletes. I was not a talker. I didn't talk about feelings or things that happened to me to my parents. And those factors are all inherent to me. But that what also made it very complex was that he was very familiar and charming with everyone. And other trainers and parents have literally said, like, oh, that's just the way he is. So where do you go when everyone tells you that situation is normal? There was the same for all my teammates. There was this climate of secrecy. He made sure that we didn't talk about it. It didn't only happen to me. So we were kind of all part of this culture of not talking. If you did say something about it, he made sure you didn't feel like part of the group. And like the sport we did was very important for everyone who did it. It was not school, it was not home, it was a place where we were away from that and we could do fun stuff and socialize. So it was really important to have that, and you accepted a lot not to lose it. And I also know that some people were a little bit aware of it, but didn't know where to go with their concerns or how to pick that up, because it was so normalized that it's hard to be objective about seeing that behavior and doing something about it, I think.
Mm. And then what services, people, what resources helped you?
Yeah, there were some people and services that really helped. So one of the biggest things was actually hearing someone else talk about their experience with abuse in sport, because this helped me recognize the meaning of what had happened to me and why it was not okay. It explained everything I felt and how I behaved. And he kind of taught me about what boundaries are, what a power imbalance is, what consent, real consent means, and that your boundaries should be respected. And that made a huge difference to come to terms with it in myself, so I could talk about it and explain it to other people what had happened and why it was bad. And one of the other things was the foundation, so Breaking the Silence. It came in the form of Renal Major, who I could talk to, and he pointed me to some resources. So all the options that were there, I didn't know they were there, so could go to the police. There is mental support. There are all these kind of services that exist that I didn't know about that could help me, and that was kind of essential to my coming forward, but also to my recovery and coming to terms with what happened. So really talking, learning to recognize what abuse is, and formal help helped me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What suggestions do you have for survivors to make it safer for them to go forward?
It's really hard to do it alone. And it takes a lot of time to come forward alone. So to know that there is a mostly unbiased person who will listen to you, whatever it is, will believe you and help you think about what your options are and how to deal with this, and provide you with steps you can take. is that's essential. And also knowing you'll be protected from backlash, so that it's safe to speak out, that there are rules in place that will protect you for speaking out. And make sure that it's something that can be talked about, that it's normal to talk about this stuff, and have support from parents and friends, and that there are institutions that can help. Just knowing that you're not alone and that you are seen makes it safer.
Thank you. And one important question, do you believe it's important that survivors influence policies and research, contribute to them?
Yeah, I think it's really important and helpful. I don't know about influencing, but definitely it's important to involve them and have them inform policies and research, because you need different kind of experts to develop tools and stuff like that to facilitate a safe sports environment, right? And a survivor is also a kind of expert of the lived experience. And I think a lived experience is really valuable for creating a policy that actually works in the real world. Our experience tells you about what the risk factors are, explain why it is not so simple to just speak out, what kind of club culture they were in that facilitated the abuse, what signs that could have been recognized or picked up that exists. You can't just think of that. There are people around you that can tell you how it can go wrong, which helps us learn how to do it in the right way. But also keep in mind that this is a big ask of people who went through this stuff. It takes energy and courage to revisit something bad in your past. So if you do, make sure you know how to involve them in an ethical way, and the information about that is out there. So use that and use that knowledge that now exists. So yeah, that's what I think about it. And I think that I'm really glad about the Safe Sport Allies project, because I have the feeling that our voices were really picked up and taken into account in the developing of all these tools. So yeah, I'm also really thankful for that.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Very crucial insights, and all your sharing are very, very important. So you summarized many of the insights that were collected within the study in Safe Sport Allies. And you mentioned all these important observations. I would add maybe just that it's very important that it has to be a cultural change, so not just an administrative check the box. And besides any type of policies and knowing the roles of everyone in the organization, is important to develop a culture where people are having the courage to address questions and to find help. So it's not only an administrative it has to be a cultural change that, as Tina said before, helps everyone to be attentive and able to answer in case of any risk. And then, it's very important to know that as survivors, as I said, it's this part connected with self-blame and not trusting to say anyone. It's an important and appears and people don't speak up because they don't know if they would be trusted or if it is true what is happening. But it's quite true, and we have to be very attentive. So these are the 10 big insights that came. That is important that to know that survivors might have some reactions that should be observed, that could be warning signs, and help all bystanders to be active and intervene if they are attentive and they observe. It's very good that the informal helpers should be active, and maybe some clues that appear in school and some signs for a child that are similar with some signs in the club, they should be correlated. So it's good that even teachers could speak with the coaches and should communicate. And in this world of digital communication, maybe it's even easier. And then it's important that the safeguarding officer, again, is able to provide a safe space. And because it's not easy to open up, even if you have a picture, but if you don't know the person. So it's good to be friendly to children and be very attentive. So, yeah, Suzanne summarized many of these insights. These are the most important ones. And it's very important that Safe Sport Allies builds on these insights, and all the methodology that was developed answer to them. So please, Tine, continue to tell us.
Thank you so much, Christina, and thank you, Sus. Really, this is we're so grateful to have you and the team of Broken Silence in this project. It has really been the crucial start and the crucial part still of everything that we do, and we learn a lot from you every day. Thank you so much. Listening to that, it really brought us a big challenge. How we will now proceed with trying to do our best and helping to put one piece of the puzzle in place and help local sport clubs to become safer and healthy. There's a couple of things that will now show up in the screen. These were the factors that we had to work with. First of all, the survivor voice, learning and understanding. This should be the crucial element in our education. Every aspect, every exercise, everything should be checked and should be quality checked by them, because they understand the best what it feels like, what is so difficult about it, what is sometimes confusing, and how we should word it, and how we should open and start the communication about such a sensitive topic. At the same time, we should increase the sense of urgency in all the stakeholders in these local clubs. And you know that that is a hard challenge, because there's so many other things to take care of when you organize local sport. There's so many things that are always on the top of your priority list, and how can we make safe sport a priority too? Even if there's low resources in a club, even if there's little time, even if there's lots of other things to do with, first of all, of course, the sport performance and sport participation, how can we make people do the decisions without compromising safety and well-being of children and all athletes in the environment? That is a big challenge. And how can we ask them to continuously educate all their members and stakeholders on the importance of safe sport and the importance of prevention and education? Certainly, we are very aware that many of these sport organizations have very low resources, have very little time, little money or expertise to invest in this. So how can we best help them? And how can we make sure that even an organization that is driven by volunteers, not professional, is willing to do the minimum of safeguarding work and is willing to provide any type of education to their members? That is the Safe Sport Allies challenge that we started with 2 years ago. Now, let's see what we came up with. What program we developed for our 4 target groups in local sport organization. First of all, the sport participants themselves. We picked a young age group where there is a big vulnerability for harassment and abuse, and we targeted our program to 12 to 14 years old. Of course, an 11-year-old and a 15-year-old was also welcome to join our workshops. And we made a very clear decision not to develop online content. Even in COVID times, we thought it was very important to organize face-to-face workshops in a safe environment with their friends and peer athletes from the same team. And we came to their clubs to do the workshop with them. Caroline will also tell you a little bit more about the aims exactly, and Anne will go into detail with what it looked like. So that was sort of a workshop with lots of different learning methodologies that we used there. Secondly, of course, the key role model for the athletes is the youth sport coach. We organized a face-to-face workshop, or worst case, an online workshop due to COVID restrictions, to go into depth with different aspects of the problem of harassment and abuse and positive bystanding. And afterwards, we kept on giving them small booster sessions online to repeat the information and to help them practice their assessment of cases of harassment and abuse. So a face-to-face workshop followed up with 3 booster sessions. Then the parents, a very important key stakeholder in youth sport clubs, but very difficult to catch. Where are they? When do they have time? Where can we meet them? So we decided to go for a webinar so that they could attend live or even watch again in a replay later. So they can take their own time. We explain a little bit more in that webinar about what safe sport is, what their responsibility is as a safe sport parent, where they can go for help in the club, and how they can see that, how they can assess whether their children's club is a safe sports club. Lastly, of course, we did not forget the club administrators. They, of course, need to provide the safe space and all the policies that need to be implemented to increase the risk for, to lower the risk for harassment and abuse. We help them by developing a self-scan instrument to see where is your policy at the moment, what are you already doing well, and where can you improve? And we provided then an advisory report to help them make these necessary changes. In order for them to increase learning, we also provided knowledge clips online so they can learn more, for example, about response mechanism or reporting mechanism, or how to improve the code of conduct and how to distribute all of these materials in the club. And lastly, specifically in Belgium, we provided a peer learning network where club administrators can get in contact with each other and learn from their practices and share. That's the set. And then, of course, we realize that not everybody can do a workshop. We also have a very low capacity to go to all of these clubs and do all of these workshops in the over 27,000 sport clubs in Belgium and many, many more throughout the world. So we decided to come up with a set of materials that people can use themselves to start working on safe sport no later than today. First of all, we have the workshop scripts available for both the sport participant workshop as well as the coaches workshop. So from A to Z, you can follow exactly everything that we do in the Safe Sport workshop and go step by step into the preparation of this workshop. These are already available. Then we developed some conversation starters. These are cards in which we, both for athletes and for coaches, give some ideas of how you can start a conversation with your athletes on a daily basis. So not a long workshop, but just a 5 or 10 minute conversation about specific topics like consent, like respect, like signs of harassment and abuse, and where to know, when to know to get help and where to find that help. We organize the methodology of a coach taking such a discussion card and discuss it with the athletes in the team he's coaching. But we also developed cards for coaches to have a discussion among each other so they can learn from each other's norms, attitudes, and knowledge. So these are the two systems we developed. Then, of course, thinking of continuous education and information, we developed fact sheet posters. These are 4 different posters targeting athletes, coaches, and parents on what to do and what their role is in safe sport. The last poster is just one to announce who the safeguarding officer is. Might be very easy, but it's crucial information. Who is a safeguarding officer? When or where can I reach that person? What can he or she do for me? That is exactly the information that we provide in a fact sheet that could be shared on social media channels or just a simple poster hanging somewhere in the sport facility. It has a QR code, which leads you to more information. Then we're in the course of finalizing our video animation that will go to all of these target groups, a short 2 or 3 minute animation, which explains the basics about what harassment and abuse is, what safe sport is, and what to do to prevent harassment and abuse and to act appropriately if you see something that you are concerned of. Lastly, we have the information for club administrators to self-scan and the report that comes out of there, and then the webinar series, both for these club administrators and parents, so they can go back to the information whenever they need it. These are posted in short YouTube videos on our website. That's, in short, what the toolbox looks like. And now I hand over to Anne from the Center of Ethics in Sport to give a little bit more of a taste and a look and feel of these materials.
Yes, thank you, Tina. So also welcome from my side. So I will show you a little bit what the conversation cards look like for coaches and also for athletes. So what we have developed is conversation cards or conversation starters for coaches. And we have developed 3 kinds of starters. So we have conversation cards with some discussion questions, so they can really discuss with their team about, for example, how do they communicate with their athletes in a respectful way? How do they manage situations of, for example, bullying with each other? How do they show respect for their athletes? How do they involve athletes in the organization of their training sessions? Stuff like that. So really small conversation starters. You can pick, for example, one question during your coach meeting, when you have like a meeting together with all the coaches, and then talk about that one question. Then next time you can do another question. And in that way, we also try to have an answer to the challenges that Tina was talking about. For example, the multi-dose challenge, that you have like multi-doses of talking about harassment and abuse in sport to really create awareness and to really help them. So this is an answer to it. So you have the conversation starters to really use during several coaching meetings, for example, with the coaches. The second one is the ranking competition. I will show this a little bit more into depth, and you will also have the possibility to experience it a little bit online. And last one is the what would you do conversation starter. This is really presenting some situations of possible harassment and abuse in sport. And then the coaches can really talk about the situation, what would they do, where can they refer to, and so on. What are the objectives of these conversation starters for coaches? First one, of course, is to engage them, to really help them to talk about the subjects, and that they really have some tools to start this conversation, to have an open conversation with everybody together. Secondly, we also want to help them to learn about what are the criteria of the other coaches to assess the seriousness of the situation. We also give them some background on the flag system that is developed in Belgium. But this is really a very nice way to talk about this, and you will also learn a bit how we will do this via the second conversation starter. And thirdly, what our main goal, of course, also is that they can share with each other some experience, maybe some good experiences, maybe some bad experiences, that they can reflect on this, and that they also can learn from each other. So this is really a main goal also of our conversation cards. So I will show you a little bit how it looks like in reality. So this is the conversation card of the ranking competition. And this is really to talk about what are your criteria to assess the seriousness of the situation, and also to help them talk about what would you do in this situation. So how does it looks like? So first of all, we always have an explanation card about the goal of the card and what is the content of the conversation card. And then we have the instruction cards, and this, for example, consists of 2 instruction cards. So you have part 1 with 1 exercise, and then you have part 2 with a second exercise. And as I told you before, you can choose to do, for example, part 1 during one coach meeting, and then you can do, for example, the second part during another coach meeting. Then we always also have some background information for the people who are leading a little bit the conversation. For example, maybe the head coach will lead the conversation, or maybe a board member or the safeguarding officer. So then they have some background information to help the conversation between the coaches, and also to give some extra background information. Then we have situation cards, and you will experience a little bit of situations via Mentimeter, because this is very small, of course. A situation card for individual sports, but we also have one for team sports. So the situation are really tailor-made to, if you are a coach in an individual sport or in a team sport. And this is one conversation card. So this is one card and how it's look like. So now I think maybe just as a sort of break, you can also experience a little bit the exercise. Normally we will do, of course, we will do this live, of course. The head coach will do this live with his team, but now we will do it a little bit online via Mentimeter. So you can go back to your Mentimeter. If you're new, you can just go to menti.com and use the code above the screen, put it in. And then my question for you is to rank the several situations that are listed there in order of severity. So 1 is the most serious situation according to you, and 6 is the least serious situation. And this is one exercise of the ranking competition that we ask the coaches to do together. You can do it in small groups, or everybody can do it separately. And then, of course, there are some discussion questions to talk about it, about their decisions on the ranking. So try it out. I give you some time to do it yourself. So you already see it here online. It's changing a lot because, as you know, everybody will have another opinion, of course. So we will wait a little bit longer to see a sort of end conclusion. But this is really, we did the exercise many times also during the workshops, and it's a really nice exercise to do. Because yeah, it really starts a conversation, and of course there will be not the answer, but it helps to start a conversation, and it immediately helps the coaches to reflect on what they think. They talk with each other about it, they listen to each other arguments, and this is really, really interesting. So please go on. I will not go into depth of your answers, but this is just so you have some experience with it. And then the second part of this conversation starter is about talking about the different situations and to ask them, what would you do as a coach? So for now, for today, I have 3 possible answers for you. So if you are not a coach, try to imagine that you are a sport coach. If you are, you can answer from your reality. And this is really also to ask them to to think about what would you do in this kind of situation. Voilà. And here as well, you see different answers, of course. And here you see it's a situation between 2 athletes that most of the coaches are more willing maybe to interact themselves with the athletes. But as you see, you also see some coaches that say, I will talk to the child safeguarding officer. But this helps a little bit to see, to start a conversation about really acting and be a positive bystander. And then a second one, to finish this small exercise, this small experience with the ranking competition, with a new case or situation. So here the head coach is the person who is doing some behavior that is maybe not really okay. And here you see immediately a bit the difference. That's also something that we have experienced during the workshops, during talking with coaches, that when you need to do something, when the behavior is about a colleague coach, they are more likely sometimes to talk really with the child safeguarding officer and not to really do themselves immediately some action. So, and this is also a way to start a conversation. Why would you go to the child safeguarding officer? Why would you not react yourself? What are barriers for you? So it's really interesting to start this conversation. Okay, I will go on with the slides, but you can keep on answering the Mentimeter. Wait. I'm sorry. Okay, here are my slides again. Voila. Then the conversation cards for sport participants. So we also have 3 types of exercises, of games actually, for the sport participants. First of all, we have the square game. I will also show you a little bit how it looks on the inside. We have the game of statements. So we give, of course, several situations and they can talk about it. Is this situation okay or not okay for you? What would you do in this kind of situation? And then we have a third exercise, the no is okay exercise, where they really try out to say no or yes to several kind of situations. And we also ask them, what would you do in a kind of situation? Would you react or not? Or would you hesitate to react? So this is also kind of exercise. Of course, you can go through it after this webinar, after we have put everything online. But this is just a small introduction to it. What are the objectives of these cards? We want that our sport participants, that they learn about what is harassment and abuse in sport for them, and that they really talk about it with each other, because for somebody something will be okay and for another person it will be not okay, and this is interesting for them to learn about it. Secondly, we also want to have them that they learn about the meaning of consent. What is consent? What does it mean to you? And we really use the cards to talk about this with the athletes. Thirdly, they will learn who they can contact when they have a concern in the club. So it's really our goal that a coach, for example, or a safeguarding officer of a club takes one of the conversation cards for the athletes, and that they then also can introduce a little bit to safeguarding officer, for example, other expert organizations that they can go to, of course also that they can go to the coach, for example, or their parents. But it's really also, again, that they talk about it and they learn about it. Because as Suus told us before, it's very important for an athlete to know where to go to. And the last objective is that they learn to say no and to accept a no, so that they experience also in which kind of situations it's sometimes difficult to say no, that they also can talk about it. So this is also one of our objectives. Of course, we don't want to lay all the everything with the athletes. We know sometimes it will be very difficult to say no, but this exercise really helps them a little bit to experience it, to say no to things, and also again to reflect on what kind of situations are okay for me and what are situations that are not okay. Voila. So here a small introduction into the square game. So again, we have an instruction card. This game also consists of two instruction cards, so part 1 and part 2. In part 1, they need to reflect on what kind of harassment and abuse we are talking about. Is it physical? Is it psychological? Is it sexual? Are we talking about neglect? And it starts the conversation about these different forms. The second card is really talking about the situations. Are they okay for you? Are they not okay? Are you hesitating between okay or not okay? So there's also a second instruction card. We again have some background information, and then again we have situation cards for team sports and also for athletes who are doing individual sports. And when it was possible, we also tried to illustrate it a little bit how it looks like in reality when you are doing it with your athletes. So this is a quick introduction into the conversation cards. Tina also told you a little bit more about the other tools. So our next question via Mentimeter is, what is your first impression about our tools? So some words for us. You're very curious. We really created it together with our target groups, so it's really tailor-made for them. We also did a lot of feedback rounds, so we hope now it's really tailor-made to our different groups that we want to target with our tools. Okay, very nice to see your feedback. Please continue to see it. It's nice to see that you think it's useful, that it's interesting, handy, open conversation. So this is really applicable. So this is really what we were hoping for, of course, but please be very honest because this helps us, of course, the most. Okay, so this was a short introduction. Now I give the floor to Caroline, who will talk a little bit more about the results of the study that we did on the effectiveness of the workshops for coaches and for athletes. Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anne, and also welcome to everybody from my side. So you got all an introduction on the project on Safe Sport Allies, also on the insights that we received from the literature, from the survivors, and of course all of the materials, or a sneak peek on the materials that we have developed. But Also important to know is are the workshops effective? Are they doing what we wish that they are doing? Do they increase positive bystander behavior among our several target groups? And therefore, we have implemented all of our workshops in Belgium, but also in the Netherlands. And you can see on the slide that we were in contact with around 100 clubs, and that in total 46 clubs in Belgium and 4 clubs in the Netherlands have participated in at least one workshop. So some clubs have participated in the workshops of sport participants, the coaches, but also the webinar of the parents, also completed the self-scan for the club administrators, but they were free to choose which workshop they would like to participate in. You can see that we reached around almost 300 sport participants, almost 170 coaches, around 70 parents with 2 webinars and 34 club administrators. So now I will present first the methodological design that we used to investigate if the workshops were indeed effective in increasing positive bystander behavior. And the measurements for the sport participants and coaches mainly focused on checking that effectiveness. So you can see that for the sport participants and the coaches, we used a pre-measurement and a post-measurement. So we asked them to complete a paper and pencil questionnaire before and immediately after the workshop that questions several components that we believe have an influence on the intentions of sport participants and coaches to perform positive bystander behavior. For the coaches, we also had a follow-up measurement 5 weeks after the actual webinar. For the parents and club administrators, we did not include an actual effective measurement, but we had a user feedback of the parents after the webinar. And for the club administrators, we have the tailor-made advisory reports based on their self-scan that they completed. So that brings me to maybe the most important part, the results that we have at this moment from the workshop of the sport participants and the coaches. Yes, what did we measure? So before I can present you the results, it's important that you know what we actually measured in the questionnaires for the sport participants and the coaches. So as I said before, we mainly focused on those components that influence the intentions and the behaviors of our sport participants and coaches with respect to positive bystander behavior. If we look at the sport participants, we used open questions to assess their knowledge about harassment and abuse. So we asked them, what do you think that harassment and abuse entails? Can you give us some examples? But we also used several Likert scales to assess their knowledge, perceived norms and intentions towards respecting consent, respecting and setting boundaries, and reporting situations that they might feel are concerning to them. We also included a questionnaire that specifically focused on bystander behavior using a specific situation, and we ended with some user feedback. For the coaches, it's more or less the same as with the sport participants, but we also focused on their readiness to change their behavior. So did their motivations to act as a positive bystander increase after the workshop and that follow-up? And then we also focused on their knowledge, attitudes, perceived behavioral control, intentions and behaviors towards setting and respecting boundaries, noticing signals of harassment and abuse, and discussing consent with their sport participants. We also included a specific scale to measure bystander behavior, and we ended with some user feedback. On the next slide, you will see the samples that we reached or that the results are based on that I will present today. So for the sport participants, it's a sample of around 160 participants. They were on average 13 years old, which is in the range that we wanted to target between 12 and 14. But you can see that there were also sport participants that were much younger. The youngest was 10, and a bit older, the oldest was 17. We did not exclude any sport participants during our workshops, as we thought it was important that the groups could join in our workshops. But we do see that the average age is 30 years old, which is our target group. The majority of the groups were boys, and you can see that the sport disciplines that we reached for sport participants included athletics, diving, football, hockey, squash, and combat sports. Then, of course, we also have the sample of our coaches. The results are based on almost 140 coaches. They were on average 39 years old, and you can see that the youngest was 15 and the oldest was 75. The majority of the group was male, and again, the sport disciplines included athletics, basketball, squash, diving, volleyball, and combat sports. So with no further ado, I will now really present some first results, and I will start with the results of the sport participants. So as I said at the beginning, when I discussed the measurements, we wanted to really measure components or determinants that influence the intentions and the behaviors of the sport participants with respect of positive bystander behavior. And in general, we can see that immediately after the workshop, that sport participants indicated higher intentions that are related to positive bystander. Their knowledge on consent, on setting and respecting boundaries increased. Their intentions to talk to an adult about situations that are concerning to them increased as well. To give you more concrete examples of what we actually measured, I have some examples on the slide, more on an item level, to give you an indication of what does it now mean when you talk about knowledge on setting and respecting boundaries. What does it mean that their intention increased on reporting? So you can see here that we had an example. If others do not give their consent for being hugged, then I will respect this. And you see that at T0, which is before the workshop, that the majority already indicated that they agree to this statement, which is already very good. But even after the workshop, a couple of more participants indicated that they agreed, and less participants indicated that they don't agree. So there is a significant increase in the number of people indicated that they will respect somebody else's boundaries. Another example is that I intend to notify an adult when somebody violates my personal boundaries. Again, we see that a lot of sport participants indicate that they agree that they will notify an adult, that they will go to an adult and say something about it. But after the workshop, 10% more agrees more to this statement. So our workshop worked really on setting and respecting boundaries, notifying an adult, and even in the results we do see this happening as well. If we then look at bystander behavior, when we look at the scale in which we included a case of harassment and abuse, then there was an item asking, I inform an adult. And before the workshop, more than half indicated that they would indeed, probably yes or definitely yes, would indicate and inform this to an adult. We see that there is a huge increase of those indicating probably yes or definitely yes after the workshop. So this is very positive. So more participants were inclined after the workshops to go to an adult and saying when something is wrong. They also indicated that they were more likely, there was an increase in watching and observing. Within the scale, this fell under the subscale of outsider behavior, but it can be that sport participants also learned throughout the workshop from, okay, it's also good to stay in the situation and to have a look at what is happening, and then maybe later on go and inform an adult or talk to the victim, asking if everything is okay. So although that I watch and observe is indicated under the subscale outsider behavior, we not necessarily see this as a bad thing. And we see also that more people are saying, I will watch and observe. You can go to the next slide. So in general, if we speak about the results of the sport participants, then indeed we see that on several components that the workshop was working on, that there is an increase, a significant increase, and that the intentions to perform positive bystander behavior has positively increased after the workshop. So now it's the question, is this the same for the coaches? Do we see the same results? Are there any differences? And I can say that overall, this is indeed also the same as with the sport participants. So again, we see that the components that focused on, that influence the intentions to perform positive bystander behavior are positively increased immediately after the workshop, and that they more or less remain stable 5 weeks after the workshops. So for several components, we see that the results remain stable. There might be a small decrease, but it's still more significant positively comparing to before the workshops. So for the coaches, we mainly focused on their attitudes, perceived behavioral control, and intentions towards consent, discussing consent, towards noticing signals, signs of harassment and abuse, and also about setting and respecting boundaries. If we go more in detail with some examples, then you can see an example here. There was an example. I believe that harassment, sorry, I'm a bit too quick. This is an example of the readiness to change, this meaning the motivations that participants had to change their behaviors after the workshops, focusing on the topic of preventing harassment and abuse. So one example here is, I believe that harassment and abuse in sport is an issue. We see that the majority before the workshop already indicates that this is a big issue or somewhat of an issue, but there is a positive increase of people saying after the workshop that this is a big issue. At follow-up, so 5 weeks after the workshop, we see a small reduction of people saying that it is a big issue, but it's still significantly more than comparing to before the workshop. If we then look at another example, I intend to gain knowledge on harassment and abuse, then we see that the workshop increased this for a lot of our coaches. So around half said, yeah, I would very much intend to gain knowledge before the workshop, but this increased immediately after the workshop and even remained stable a couple of weeks later. I do have to say that the number of participants in the follow-up measurement includes only around 40 to 45 participants. So when I speak about the follow-up measurement, it's a smaller sample than when I talk about before and after the workshop. So then we have also the bystander index. So questions that really focus on these aspects that influence intention of positive bystander behavior. So here we see on the slide, I talk with the sport participants about boundaries and respect. We see that the majority often or sometimes does it with their sport participants before the workshop. After the workshop, we see an increase. And we even see that after 5 weeks, after the workshops, this even more increases. So they really learned that it's important to talk about boundaries and respect during the workshops, and that they apparently do this in the meanwhile between when the workshop is finished and when we talk to them again, that they indeed talk with their sport participants. Another example is it is important to have consent from the sport participants. Again, the coaches indicate this as very important. A lot of them do so, and this even significantly increases immediately after the workshops and even at follow-up. If we then look at the specific bystander scale, then there is a specific item that falls under the subscale of pro-bully behavior. The example on the slide, I watch amused at the situation, and then we see before the workshop that the majority, almost everybody indicates I would probably not or definitely not do this. So this is very good. This is the result that we want to see. But after the workshop, we see that for those couple of participants that indicated I would definitely do this, that this number also has significantly decreased. So this is very good. And that even a couple of weeks later, everybody says I will probably not or definitely not do this. So although that we see before the workshop that our participants indicate already fairly good positive bystander behaviors, there is even an increase or an improvement immediately after the workshop. So can go to the next slide, Anne. So overall, before I go to the participants' feedback, both for the workshop of the sport participants as for the coaches, we see improvements in intentions to perform positive bystanders behaviors, which is very good and which is very pleasing to see as well. If we then look at the participants' feedback, then we see that the majority of our sport participants thought that the workshop was very interesting, that they learned a lot, and that they would recommend the workshop to their peers. We've also added some quotes of the sport participants. We asked them, what will you remember of this workshop, or what do you believe is the most important thing that you have learned in this workshop? Then they indicated, for example, you need to respect the boundaries of others, that consent is more important than you think. So they really noted down in an open-ended question some of the main key topics that we thought were important, and they really also indicated this as well. For the coaches, we also see that the majority found the workshop interesting, that they would recommend it to their peers. And they felt also more prepared to respond on situations of harassment and abuse. So that's also very important to see that they really feel more, that they had more experience to handle situations of harassment and abuse. So that brings us, we have all of these materials developed based on workshops that seems to be effective to improve positive bystander behavior in preventing harassment and abuse. But it's also important that all of these materials find their way in all of the other grassroots local sport clubs that are out there, and that we can prevent harassment and abuse in local sport clubs. So therefore, we also have a last part about sustainable implementation, and I will give the floor to Huub, who will enlighten us with this topic. So Huub, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Caroline. So sustainable implementation, what do we mean by that? Great. Okay, so for who is this sustainable implementation? Who can use it? First of all, it's for professionals who in sports. Think about sport federations or national organizations such as the National Olympic Committee, etc. Also policymakers on a local level, such as a municipality, or on a more national level, could use this implementation strategy. And maybe most importantly, board members from local sports clubs, and also involved trainers and coaches. Okay, so what do we mean with a sustainable implementation? Is a process of introducing something new into an existing context. This is very important, and this, of course, also with the aim to create continuity. Okay, so what is the context of the sport club? Well, Tina just talked a little bit about the reliability on volunteers and the low resources that sport clubs have. Of course, this is not necessarily a negative point. It could also be very positive, but also an important aspect about sport clubs is their member meeting. So decision making is based on the majority decision on the members meetings, this therefore you need a more bottom-up approach and not really a top-down approach, because the majority of the members of the club needs to vote for the action. So to create this bottom-up approach, we created a roadmap consisting of 5 steps with the eventual goal of creating a learning network. So the first step, we will go through them. The first step will be to inventorize the relevant stakeholders. These are the stakeholders that will be helpful and could contribute to the implementation process. You need to identify them for your stakeholder fields. You need to categorize them. This could be of the level of influence they have or the level in which they operate. And then you need to prioritize them in how they could contribute to the implementation process. So when you have this list of the relevant stakeholders, you need to inform them. This information aims to create awareness under the stakeholders. This could be through an information event, so it would be helpful to organize an information event under the categorized stakeholders from the previous step. And this information evening could be used to share insights and practices under the different relevant actors. And then when you have this, when you have informed them all, you go to the next step. You go to transferring. You should go from information to ownership, and this aims to create an understanding of importance for the subject and use the materials in an effective and durable way. In creating this understanding or ownership could be done in a couple of ways. You could invite an influential speaker. You can organize debate events or debate evenings. And you could also use examples of intimidation or bullying from local and maybe a national level to show the importance of this subject. And all with the main aim to create a sort of collective ownership under the club members or the organizing stakeholders. And when you have this collective ownership of importance of the subject, you can start with carrying it out. You just created ownership, and now you have to create a base of support within the club for this subject. And with this small group, and in most of the cases, we'll see that there's a couple of individuals who are most reliable for the implementation of this theme. So you have different sort of strategies that you could use to facilitate them. You could have hard strategies or soft strategies, and due to the nature of the sport club, they're voluntarily based and low resources. Soft strategies would be more likely or better, have a better effect. These could be advice on how to use the different materials, create ground rules on which board members could operate or volunteers would operate in, or also sort of tempt or almost seduce the members of the club to accept or to use the materials. This could be through a campaign or through events. And most importantly, you could facilitate cooperation between the different stakeholders within a club that have this in their, that are using this. And then when you facilitate this cooperation, you go to the last step, creating continuity. Because for creating continuity, we need commitment, learning opportunities, and synergy. And this synergy eventually will lead to a learning network. So that will be the last slide. Great. So the aim of the learning network, because of the low-cost nature of sport clubs, we need to focus on a relative cheap way of creating a local network for clubs or trainers that learn from each other and are facilitating and learning from each other, while still being under the minimal supervision of the organizing stakeholder who sort of controls the narrative and if the materials are implemented in a good sense. And this could be achieved by involving municipalities or sport federations. They have a big network and a lot of resources. They also could use, you could also give these organizations a role in the implementation, sort of maybe make a sport federation moderator in the debate so that they feel engaged also in the subject on a local level. And you need to facilitate that they maintain in contact the different cooperation groups and share their insights. And it is important that there is a clear organizing stakeholder for the different cooperating networks so that they know who they can ask questions and who will organize meetings. And when you have that, when you checked all the boxes, you have an expanding learning network that keeps itself up to date and learn from itself. And that would be the ultimate goal of the implementation strategy.
Okay, thank you, Hab. This is a very realistic, but still a hard thing to do. So it continuously asks our attention to invest time in bringing people together, sharing experience, setting up learning networks. It's not just the materials. We realize that. That is what we can provide. And we were very thankful for all of the clubs that opened their doors for us to come in and try the intervention. But now it's up to the sport organization with our help to install and invest in really structural changes and structural implementation of these tools. Thanks for sharing these tips. Please, to the audience, go one more time to menti.com because we have a final question. You now heard a little bit about our Safe Sport Allies project, our project that we work on a daily basis for 2 years now. And we wonder what's your wish for the project? For us, to even work more on with Safe Sport Allies? Are there things you think we should focus on most? Could you think of ways that we can continue our work also after the end of the Erasmus Plus collaborative partnership, which will be ending in a couple of months? And are there other things you want to share with us with regard to the project? Yes, expansion indeed, multiplying and making sure as many people as possible receive the materials. That's our biggest dream too. Indeed, making sure it's evidence-based. That is, we are working very hard on that to make sure that the tools that we develop, that they really make sense, that we know that they're effective once implemented in the sports sector. Of course, we will not keep on measuring them. As soon as we know they work well, it's up to the sports club to use them, and we will not bother them with more and more questionnaires as we did now. Yeah, we also hope they will be used as much as possible in local sport clubs. That was the aim of our the main aim of our project. We will sure be available for sharing our expertise. This maybe looks like a very fluent, nicely looking project, but to be honest, Caroline, I'm looking at you now. It's hard to organize such an intervention study in local volunteer-driven sport clubs during COVID times or times where there are many other priorities. So indeed, it's not all going super well, and we learned a lot on how to engage. And I learned from her the word seduction that we have to use to really convince people that safe sport is an important priority in every sport organization without coming with a negative view on sport or the structure of their clubs. That is a challenging thing to do, but I think by offering such materials, we can only make it as easy as possible for them to engage and really invest in education. Keep your wishes coming. That is so nice and good to read. So we'll collect all of them and share them on our website later. But I think it's now time to close the webinar by giving you some teasers for materials that are soon to come. So first of all, there's the Safe Sport Allies animation video that we couldn't show you today, unfortunately, because it's very close to be finished, but not good enough to show. This means that in a couple of days, actually, we will be able to launch it and to spread it into our networks. It will be a 2 or 3 minute animation video with lots of triggers and actually an awareness raising video on the importance of safe sport, how to respond to cases, and even more, how to put enough importance on prevention. That's the video that is about to come. And then additionally, here's on the next slide, you see our web page. Don't judge us, it's not a professional website, it's just our website, our landing page for collecting all the materials. The ones that are available already, you can find them already on safesportallies.eu, but more will be added soon. We're in the final step of creating these and double checking the content. The materials will be available both in English and in Dutch. And please reach out to us if you are willing to translate it into your own sector or into your own language. We will make sure we also make materials available that are easy to change so that you can keep the nice layout, but can easily change the language of the tools. So don't hesitate and reach out to us in case you would like to use that opportunity to bring the materials into your own context. I'm closing now with our future hopes for the Safe Sport Allies project. First of all, we're very proud to announce that we started a mini Safe Sport project already with the help of the European Commission support of the Erasmus Plus collaborative partnerships. We started a project focusing specifically on sport for people with disability. As we know, they are very vulnerable to experience harassment and abuse. And this is something that is very close to my heart, that it's so hard to bring them to sport, and once they're in sport, they're exposed to even more forms of harassment and abuse than athletes without a disability. So we are now testing which of these tools also work well to support coaches of athletes with a disability. And this is currently ongoing, led by a couple of experts in Belgium and the Netherlands on parasport. So we're very happy to see that growing, and these materials will also be, as soon as they're ready, will also be shared on the same channels. And then, of course, we're dreaming of a Safe Sport Ally Plus or 2, and we're trying to find some funding to go specifically into the context of young elite athletes. Similar to para-athletes, we know they have an increased vulnerability to experience harassment and abuse, and we are very aware that their context might be different from the context of a local sports club. So we would like to invest even more in investigating their environment and making sure that all the people in the athlete entourage there are well educated on the topic of harassment and abuse and how our tools can play a role in there. And lastly, Safe Sport Allies is our project now, but I hope it will soon be your project too. So whenever you think there is a possibility or an opportunity to collaborate or to take some of these materials back to your own organization, please do so. This is just an idea that started among a couple of us, but it will only work if everybody or as many people as possible are willing to use it and are convinced of its quality and the possibility that it has to improve safe sport for all athletes. So this is just a start. Everything is available to you on our website. And if you have any questions or suggestions, just reach out to us via email, for example. And we will also be sharing the recording of this webinar with you there. If there's no more questions or suggestions from my colleagues, then I think we can close the webinar here. And then I wish you a happy rest of the day, and I hope to see you all soon. Thank you.